And I'm going to give you a brief summary of a technical journal article. So the article is Optimal Taxation in Theory and Practice by Greg Mankiw, 2009. At that time, Mankiw was the head of economics for Harvard University, the department chairman. In the article, he presents 6 or 7 findings, some of which, I'm only going to focus on one, some of which are not especially noteworthy. But one of the recommendations he makes that is very unusual is that we ought to tax only final goods and services in an economy. And so now he passes over labor. He says, income tax. He says, well, labor is, this is where it remains a bit of a mystery or something like that. Now, when he does treat income taxes in the paper, he does have one interesting finding. He says that we ought to have in order to reach optimal taxation, we have a flat tax. And that optimizes a lot of what we're trying to achieve in terms of getting the most efficient allocation of resources in the economy. However, that lower income groups ought to have a bit of a higher tax rate. And the rationale for this is that the lower income groups are, of course, the ones that will receive welfare, transfer payments of different kinds. And so Mankiw's finding is that if you make the income tax a bit higher, so a flat tax across the board, but perhaps a bit higher at the bottom, then you create an incentive to prevent people who are just above the income thresholds for welfare to lower their income or work less hours so that they reach that point where they receive those transfer payments. So you penalize that in a bit. And you incentivize, of course, then the reverse would be that you have an incentive if you're at that lower income to receive a higher income. So on to his point I want to discuss a little bit more. Mankiw makes one real interesting finding that is that we'd reach optimal taxation for an economy if we only tax goods and services. So a sales tax, hypothetically. But his point is that we shouldn't tax any intermediate goods. So intermediate goods and services. And really, although he doesn't say this, what he's getting at is that all taxes that are levied on business are really paid by the consumer. They're not paid by the business. The firm might collect them, for instance, but they're ultimately paid at the cash register in the form of a higher price. And so what you end up with, of course, is a consumer that doesn't know how much he or she's paying in taxes because the price of goods and services is just higher than it otherwise was going to be. The other point that Mankiw makes when it comes to sales tax is it ought to be flat across all industries. So if we want the overall economy to get to its production possibility frontier, to produce as many goods and services as we can with the resources we have, then we shouldn't have extra penalized sales tax on certain things. So for instance, sin taxes on alcohol and cigarettes might be a common one. Another one you hear sometimes would be no tax on basics, essentials, bread and milk. Maybe you're not going to be subject to a sales tax. Some states have provisions like that. And so anyway, Mankiw examines that in the paper, and what he finds is that if you don't have a flat sales tax, then you create distortions. So you create an incentive for the high-taxed area, say it's alcohol is a common one, to have fewer resources allocated in there than it should, and then an area that doesn't have much sales tax or has lower tax than the high area to receive more resources. So ultimately you create a bubble in one area, one sector, one line of production, because a lot of resources flow there more than there's really demand, and you create artificial scarcity on the other side. So the way he says this, I'm going to read to you from the paper, is optimal taxes can leave an economy on its production frontier, production possibility frontier he's referring to. Maintaining productive efficiency rules out taxes with different effects across industries, sectors, or time periods, and generally forbids taxes on intermediate inputs to production because they distort the allocation of factor inputs. So anyhow, those are a couple of the findings that are, again, very interesting in the theory of optimal taxation. They're a lot different than what you might expect. And the paper, again, is Greg Mankiw, 2009, and it's Optimal Taxation in Theory and Practice. Again, this has been Rick Kelo, and thank you for listening.